You're listening to On the Road Again, a road trip through the Bible, with Todd X-ile and Zach Bechtold. Now let's hit the road.
I just can't wait to get on the road again. The life I love is making music with my friends, and I can't wait to get on the road again.
Welcome, everyone, to the On the Road Again podcast. I'm Reverend Todd, and with me is Zach and John, as often they are. Two of my favorite people in the world. Definitely two of my favorite people to be on the podcast. So thank you guys for joining us, and thank you all for listening, whoever's listening. And today we're going to be talking about David and Goliath. That comes from 1 Samuel chapter 17, we're going to read verses 3 through 10 and then 24 through 51 to try to get the whole story in there pretty good. So how are you guys doing today?
I was doing good until you just told me how much of the Bible I have to read in one sitting, and now I feel like that's a lot.
They're short
fine.
bursts. They're short with few names.
Short bursts.
I feel like I'm back in my Hebrew Bible class where it's just having to read chunks and chunks and chunks at a time. So yeah, feeling great.
Oh yeah.
Hopefully there's not a test after this.
Oh yeah, I forgot to tell y'all.
If you'd like to pose us test questions that Todd will answer, please comment below, and Todd will be happy to answer your test question. You can assign him points the longer the essay. Never mind, I'm gonna stop right now.
I'll use the Google. All right. Speaking of cheating, David, and we
don't know that about him yet in chapter 17.
Yeah. We're not there yet, but
that comes later. That's
foreshadowing, the literary device of foreshadowing. Sorry, my smoothie went down wrong. I've been coughing. So we last week or last episode, we talked about David and David being chosen to be king and anointed to be king. And his brothers were not very happy about that. He was the youngest. He was out in the field. His brothers were older than him. And the oldest one was supposed to get all the advantages and all the stuff. And if a king, so Saul was the king, and so really Saul's son should have been the king, but they went and God called an audible, and Samuel went to a different family, which was Jesse's family, and David was chosen to be king, even though he was the youngest, and he was not even invited to the party. And so now the plot thickens because there's conflict and in the land that David is going to be king of, but only David's family knows he's going to be king, and Samuel, because Saul would be really, really mad, which also happens later on after this. And so we're kind of in a good place here where there's some conflict in the land. We're going to read about that a little bit. And then read about David's big fight that everybody that's watched a football game that has an underdog, and they always call it a David and Goliath match. And so we all kind of know of that story, but we're going to really read that story and get into the meat of it today. So do you guys have any initial thoughts or comments before we get into the scripture?
No, I almost always do, but I think this one, the story will just kind of lead us into some of the bits, so I'll save the comments for later. I know, it's weird, I always have initial comments, but it's a long passage, so with that in mind, let's get to the heart of the matter and we'll comment as we go.
I'd say the same thing, other than, what we're gonna get into it more than your Sunday school lesson, because there's so much more. This is the Paul Harvey version of David and Goliath.
Yeah.
That would have been a good name for the podcast, the Paul Harvey, going through the Bible with Paul Harvey style or something. But that's exactly right.
I feel like there's probably some copyright there.
That's true. I don't want to get into a legal battle with the Paul Harvey estate again.
Talk about David versus Goliath.
Absolutely.
Watch out, Paul Harvey, I'm bringing some stones.
All right. I'll go ahead and read first. I'll read 3 through 10, and then we'll talk about it, and then we'll get into the other part of it. This is 1 Samuel chapter 17, starting in verse 3. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with a valley between them. So the Philistines were coming to attack. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? Are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistine said, "This day I will defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." Very Conor McGregor. That's what I think when I think of how Goliath talks.
Yeah.
So what do you guys have some initial thoughts? What jumps out at you about this part of the story?
So I think, one thing that's interesting, as you set it up a little bit, Todd, and then we read it, what really struck me, I mean, it's always sort of obvious, Goliath is a giant. If you do the math, he's somewhere over 9 feet tall. If you calculate all those weird cubit is like the measure from your elbow to end of your hand. And so if you do the math, he's somewhere over 9 feet tall, 9.5, something like that. And so he's a big guy. And there's all sorts of, like really interesting things that roll back into Genesis about giants and sort of where that comes from. And there's a supernatural overtones and weird stories about like the angels falling and intermarrying with, people comes into that, and is Goliath part of that whole thing? It doesn't say it, but there's lots of sort of overtones. But the other thing that strikes me about just his height and the stature is in the story of Saul being chosen, one of the only criteria for why Saul was chosen is the fact that Saul himself stood head and shoulders above everyone else in Israel.
Oh,
So yeah, so like what makes a good king? That dude's tall. Like, and like, well, you know, and it makes sense, right? I mean, like the main job of the king. I mean, Israel had never had a king until Saul, so they're still trying to figure out what a king's even for. And really, the big thing is typically it's the king who is supposed to lead people out to battle. Uh, and so the reason you want your leader to be tall is so you can see where the leader is going in battle and you know which way to go. You know which way the battle is going, and you can tell if you're winning or not because if his head disappears, you guys are in trouble. You better run.
yeah.
Um,
And it's
and
intimidating, right, to the enemy. It's more of an intimidating presence.
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, the bigger your lead guy is, but it's just, I mean, it really starts to spin all these kind of fascinating critiques, really, in a commentary. It sets up for David, who is not, um, a leader in that way physically. I mean, apparently he's good looking, as we'll read in a little bit, but he's not tall. Um, and I mean, it's really interesting that Saul is chosen to be king because he's tall. Goliath is their champion because he's really tall. It's sort of this, I mean, outward appearance, who's really the champion? I mean, there's a lot set up in the rest of the story and that ties us to the story that's been told so far, that's way beyond just, trying to pose Goliath as this intimidating force. There's a lot of additional overtones to that, that echoes all the way back and that sort of calls into question, you know, why isn't Saul out there countering this challenge? Where the heck is he? He's our tall guy. We got to get our tall guy out there. And is outward appearance a sign of God's favor and the kind of strength that we're looking for if we take it from the literal to more of the symbolic realm. Um, and so there's, again, right? Yeah, the Sunday school version, like you were saying, Zach, is this is a giant because it makes the victory for David look more impressive. I'm like, there's connotations already in the story about seeing people in a certain light simply because of their outward appearance and the most obvious aspect of appearance.
And even David, right? I mean, they mention how handsome he is over and over again. And he's the next king. So they're like, okay, the tall guy didn't work. Let's go for the good looking guy. If it's like The Bachelor.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And of course, what's kind of interesting about that too is, most big corporation CEOs are between 6'2" and 6'4", right?
Oh, wow.
Still in our country today. So there's still a bias and an expectation um, in that realm, which is kind of fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe
You
things
know,
haven't changed that much in the last 2,500 years.
maybe they have, maybe not. Yeah.
Or I guess 3,000 years, right? This is around this all happened around 1,000, around 1,000.
Yeah. Yeah. So, anyway, so those are my initial thoughts, kind of on the height and some of the overtones for that.
What about you, Zach? Any initial thoughts?
I think mine, like you said, John, they pick Saul because he's big, right? And almost immediately they hate him. They begin to reject him, and he begins to kind of do his own thing. And he's not really feeling the king thing in the way that Samuel brings forth, and God's calling him to be. He almost immediately just rejects it and does his own thing. And the people around him are like, it's not what we signed up for, so let's get another one. And then we go polar opposites with David, and this seems to be that breakdown of that relationship of, oh, here's what these dynamics are going to be. And you're right, our big dude's not going out there to fight the other guy's big dude. Our little guy's going out there. What's happening, right? And so you really quickly see, and we'll see it later on in scripture, the deterioration of that relationship between Saul and David, and how that begins to shift and change. But rather than it even starting with David being anointed, I think it's here is where you see that real big breakdown and shift towards David rather than Saul as king.
Yeah, the new king, the new king is going to go fight, but nobody knows he's going to be the new king. But this has to help, right? And we can get into that in a minute too. It's fascinating to me how specific they are in this about Goliath's armor, Goliath's gear. Like they're very specific about like what it looked like, how good it was, how strong it was, and it sets up the contrast of the story between what Goliath uses and what Saul wants David to use. And we'll get into that in a second. I just want to, it's just interesting to me how the story gets set up with a very specific, this is how tall he is. Like, it's almost like a prize fight, where it's like, here's his stats. Here's the weapons he's using. This is what he's chosen to come here with. And then, because then that's so contrasted, there in a little bit. So I guess that's what jumps out to me.
He's obviously good at what he does. Because he's got good gear. He's got that era's version of bling in the right car and all that kind of stuff. I mean, he's good at what he does, and he's showing that he's good at what he
does. He's not just a big, right?
Right.
There's more to it.
Yeah, he's big and he's effective. I think the other thing about that is, as you started talking, Todd, that also strikes me, and I wasn't thinking about this because this is more of a seeing the symbolic value in scripture, which is actually what we're supposed to do. I mean, we should start with a literal reading. This goes all the way back to the early church fathers, and then not stay with a literal reading, which is very counter to the way a lot of people say we should be looking at scripture these days, strangely enough. But the early church fathers thought, that was only the preliminary level, and then you should go into these deeper levels of the spiritual reading and, what does it symbolize in the allegorical reading, which for much of Christian history was expected out of those who would read the Bible. The other thing that I don't know, maybe this has occurred to me before in the story, but it's just sort of interesting. Why does Israel accept the contest that Goliath poses? You know what I mean? Like, and of course we do that all the time, right? We talk about being fair and listening to people and giving other people a chance, but most of the time we get into arguments to win, and we'll set things up so that we win. I mean, we don't really want to engage somebody else according to their strengths. We want to cater to our strengths and not really give people a chance. And it kind of strikes me, given what, just the way people operate in our culture today, in kind of that symbolic reading of Goliath. Why does he get to dictate how the battle's going to run? Why does he get to set the rules? Why does he get to turn this into a tournament of champions? Why does the Israelite army allow that? Why don't they get up en masse and just say, no, we're not going to pick one guy. Why don't you stand out in the field and we're all going to come out there, and you're big, but if there's 200 of us, we're going to kick your butt. But instead, they allow him to dictate the rules of engagement with no pushback, critique, consideration. That's odd.
Yeah, it is. It is. I didn't think of that. Because he tells them, hey, this is how I want to fight. And they're like, okay. Like that's not usually, that's not very smart.
I guess a whole army, right? And
yeah. I guess that's how scared they are of this guy. Like which is crazy.
Yeah, interesting. Fear and uncertainty, maybe the turmoil already setting in, their relationship with Saul, all this stuff going on allows them to just yield the power to Goliath. They allow his physical power to encroach upon other forms of power, and they yield an awful lot to him when they don't have to abide by that. It's interesting.
Yeah.
It is interesting. But you do have this big dude out there, right? And there's some sense of prove yourself, right? Who's going to do this for us? He's issued a challenge, right? I mean, we still as people today do that. Like, oh, this guy wants to fight, right? Okay, I've got my 4 buddies behind me, but you guys hold me back, leave me alone, right? I'm gonna go.
Yeah.
And yet we still do that. It's just that human nature within us that's like, well, we can figure this out, right? They got their one guy, we'll get our one guy, and we'll go. But it extends beyond this into this relationship with them and the Palestinian, or the Philistines, right? It's this constant back and forth between the two of them of, here's this one thing, now we come in, and it's just that constant divide of each other setting the rules and setting the bar to that next place of who's going to come out on top, rather than doing the logical thing of, oh, you've got your one dude, and we got an army, right? we got a Hulk, and coming out that way rather than just sending out Iron Man. Yeah, so it sets up a really interesting tone for their whole relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And it shows weakness from the beginning. It shows weakness from the Israelite side from day one. They don't think they already don't think they have a chance because they're not even challenging, the rules, and that probably
well, and the one guy that's supposed to protect them, their king, and to lead them, it's like, who's gonna go? It's not me. Who's coming out?
Yeah, it's almost like, I'm okay as long as I'm the tallest guy. But, oh man, you got a guy that's, oh, nah, I'm out. Like, As long as I'm head and shoulders above the rest of you, I'm good. But nope, nope.
They're just waiting for somebody to volunteer as tribute. Who is it? You can wear my armor, you can do whatever, but just go as long as it's not me.
Somebody else. Somebody else.
Yeah, then that does that. That's very consistent with Saul's leadership style, right? Like, and what some of the problems were, which is why God chose somebody else.
Yeah.
Different.
Well, and you know, it's. I mean, it reminds me of a couple other things. I mean, like current American politics, which are like you pick your champion and you have to support that champion regardless of anything. Like, and you don't critique that champion. Man, I mean, talk about that being alive and well in America these days. Um, and the other thing that it reminds me of is, once we're afraid and we've sort of accepted parameters, even when they've been forced upon us by somebody else and we don't have to accept them. But once we accept them, then creativity is stifled, and we are no longer able to be creative and solve problems and dream about doing things in a different way. And I think here it's sort of about physical prowess and military conflict, but symbolically, I think there's lots of areas in which the same thing holds true. I mean, Israel is not able to say, well, we have an army. What if we just deploy everybody right now and kick your butt? Because once they accept the parameters, they are not able to think outside of it. And I think, man, I say that in my own life. Like, I think the church right now is stuck in that framework of once we accept, sort of these parameters and other people's definition of what we should do and who we are, then our creativity is stifled. We're not able to get outside of the box. And then at that point, it's just like, oh, well, okay, like what's the best way we can work given this narrow field, instead of saying we're not no we don't have to abide by any kind of narrow realm. I mean, we can do things in all kinds of different ways. We can think of things in new and creative ways. um, we don't have to. I mean, for us it becomes like, what even makes that the enemy? I mean, do we even have to approach this in conflict? I mean, there's all kinds of options start to open up. um, and it also, as we talk, it makes me mindful of those kind of realities. And I kind of see the symbols in Goliath and Israel is really playing out, um, in our own lives and culture and situations in so many different ways, right? Once we accept this limited view, then it's really hard for us to claim ground outside of it. And what that ends up doing is stifling our creativity, narrows our own response to things, heightens conflict, just a lot.
And yeah, and we have to break those paradigms to create those changes. Like we have to break that. Like the parameters that we set up, when they stop working, we have to get outside of that somehow. Which is exactly what God's doing in this whole story.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
I'm not going to pick from this family, even though I'm supposed to. I'm not going to pick the oldest, even though I'm supposed to. In fact, I'm going to pick the youngest, who's not even there, right? And then it goes on to here, like, okay, Goliath has all of these things. Somebody has to defend. It's supposed to be Saul. It's not going to be Saul. Spoiler alert. And so that's what we have to do now is find ways to break out of that. Break out of the paradigms that are there, which a lot of people are doing, but the church is having a hard time doing that because we kind of made those parameters in a lot of ways. We created that. It's hard to get away from something you created, I think.
Yeah.
But God does it all the time.
Yeah. Or just accept it, right? I mean, I think kind of the David and Goliath story at this point, right, is even if Israel didn't create all these things, they have accepted these conditions.
Right.
And definitions of what they're even doing. And so there's only so much room.
Yeah, that's a great observation. That's really good. That reframes this in a really good way for me. That makes it very practical with what's going on in the church. Because what you accept, that's the world you choose to live in. You don't have to create it. You just only really have to accept it, and then that's where you are. And they, oh, we'll get to that in a second. You guys ready to go on to does one of you want to read 24, 24 through, what do we say, 37? 24 through
Yeah.
30.
You want me to take that chunk? I can take that chunk.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
24 through 37. So we've jumped over a little bit, but it's actually going to pick up on a verse that works really well off of where we left off. But in the interlude, David, who again is not there, his older brothers who are passed over in the anointing for king, are in the army, so they're out there, looking at Goliath, and David once again is not there. But his family's like, oh, the brothers are probably hungry out there on the battlefield, so why don't you take them lunch? And so David shows up on the battlefield carrying lunch for his older brothers, and that picks up with these words, verse 24. All the Israelites, when they saw the man, fled from him and were very much afraid. And that's Goliath, not David. The Israelites said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. The king will greatly enrich the man who kills him and will give him his daughter and make his family free in Israel. Shouldn't they already be free? Never mind, we'll just keep reading. David said to the men, getting to the commentary ahead of time, sorry. David said to the men who stood by him, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? People answered him in the same way, so shall it be done for the man who kills him. So David's eldest brother Eliab heard him talking to the men. And David's been listening. We jumped into the middle of the conversation after David gets to the camp. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David. He said, why have you come down? With whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart. For you have come down just to see the battle. David said, what have I done now? It was only a question. He turned away from him toward another and spoke in the same way, and the people answered him again as before. When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. David said to Saul, let no one's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. Saul said to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are just a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and whenever a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went after it and struck it down, rescuing the lamb from its mouth. And it turned against me, I would catch it by the jaw, strike it down, and kill it. Your servant has killed both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, since he has defied the armies of the living God. David said, the Lord who saved me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will save me from the hand of the Philistine. So Saul said to David, go, and may the Lord be with you.
All right. I think it's important, like that, and I think it speaks to them, allowing Goliath to dictate these rules because of their fear, right? When they see him, they all fled from him in great fear. So everybody's running away from him. So it's going to be hard to organize an army like to fight him or to gang up on him because they're all so afraid. And obviously not being afraid is a huge theme in the Bible, and we don't talk about it nearly as much, I think, as the Bible talks about it. But don't be afraid is over and over and over, almost in any story. Facing your fears is a huge part, and fear leads to bad stuff almost always. I mean, in the Bible stories. So I think that's super important, and that's the first thing I noticed. What stands out to y'all?
So much.
There's a lot in there.
There's a lot in there. John talked a little bit about the relationship of David and his brothers and the real lineage, right? The succession of, it's never the youngest. Never, ever the youngest that gets anything. But I think what catches my attention first is that question of Eliab of, why are you here? Who did you lead the few sheep we gave you to, right? We didn't even give you enough responsibility to have a whole flock. It's just a few. Why can't you go and do the thing we told you to do and stay away and stay out there? And so this obviously comes after his anointing, and it feels very much like, David, just go out, You're not special. You have a handful of sheep. Go tend to them. Let us do the real work of being the oldest, the brothers, the people who are enlisted in the army here, and we'll go fight the battles. You go tend to the handful of sheep. And yet David's still coming down. He still feels that sense of responsibility, maybe anointing or not, right? But this wanting to belong and be a part and to go do his part as just a guy that's in this society, and he wants to go. So he comes down and he's hanging out and looks to see, and his brother questions him all along, which being the youngest in my family, totally get, right? David is near and dear to my heart. I'm like, I've been there, David. I'll go tend to my handful of sheep, but I'm going to go and see what's going on with the rest of the family and the things around me, right? Whether I'm invited or not. And so I don't know, I just think that's really interesting that they decided to include that conversation of why are you here? Which for me helps David live into that anointing that he has to be king, and to take his place in it.
Yeah, it's interesting, and really relevant that so their fear and their anxiety and their hostility is coming from Goliath, and that's sort of, I mean, that's where those emotions should take them. I mean, it should strengthen their resolve to engage. They should be focused there. But again, so characteristic of human nature. Goliath is too tough. He's not an easy target for any of these guys. But along comes David, and there's some animosity already there. And David's a lot easier of a target. And so all this hostility, I know your heart, your presumption, your evil. It's like, what the heck are you talking about, dude? Like, this is crazy. But it's also human, because it's easier to take out your frustrations, your anxiety, your fear on somebody close to you who you think you can do that to. And simultaneously, probably since you're in a crowd, look tougher to the guys around you. That's easier and than turning around and going back out to the field and plucking up your courage and saying we should do something about the actual problem. So instead, you create a problem, which is easier, and you let all your angst out in that direction, which is really inappropriate. And man, I mean, I think, again, there's this parable built into the middle of this story of David and Goliath about human nature and how we, and I mean, don't we do that in families and church, in groups, in friendship? I mean, wherever it is, it's just we pick these fights instead, with those who should be closer to us, family members, because we're afraid to tackle the stuff we need to, and so instead we just create a fight on the inside, because we figure we can win that one, or strike fear in the face. Yeah.
Right. We go to the place we can control, right? Like it more times than we would probably want to admit, coming home and having a bad day at work, coming home, taking it out on our family, right? Just being grumpy or, those types of things. But it's been an observation of mine in the church for a long time that when things in people's lives, whether it's work or economy or whatever, become uncontrollable, often the thing that church people come to do, they come to the church and begin to control what's going on at the church level, right? Because it's something that we can control. When things are unpredictable and we can't grab onto them in our everyday life, we go to the places that we can, whether that's our home life, whether that's church or some other community, right? We try to go and we dictate what's going on there because we can have a little bit of power and get our way and just feel like we have some sense of control. And I think you're right. I think all of them here, but especially David's older brother. It's like, what can I grab onto? Oh, it's my little brother. Great, we'll control him and put him in his place.
Yeah, and so we end up, right, we use all our power, our energy, our strength, fighting these ridiculous battles from within with people that should be a source of support and strength and solidarity. And instead, we pick the fights there, and fracture everything on the inside, and there's no capacity left for doing the stuff on the outside or taking care of, those external threats or challenges, whatever. If in this story that's how it's defined, I would define it a little softer in terms of the symbolism. I don't think the church should be so us versus them, but still, I mean, I think the lesson is there that in so many places, the church is so busy. People in general, like you said, Zach, are so busy sort of fighting from within, grappling with that power, just taking out their frustrations or whatever it is, and then there's no power left to deal with the real challenges that are going on. And there's also, it's that internal focus, right? And sort of looking, here they are fighting in the camp. What are you guys doing? Like, it's insane. Yeah. It's insane. And yet,
like getting in a fight in the huddle before a play on the football field with your own team. And that's never gonna go, that's never gonna go well. And I think that's a really good observation from this story, because it's such a thing that people do, in the sense of taking it out on the ones we love or ones closest to us or ones we know we're gonna stick around, and that are safe, which is abusive, really. I mean, it's an abuse. It's not a good thing, and I just think about how the church, the things the church should fight against, right, isn't a big giant, but it's things like poverty and suffering and the lack of compassion in the world, and the lack of hope that people have in their lives, and things like that. And I feel like the church has a lot of things to aggressively fight against, but it's not other people or other churches or other institutions. It's these other things, and we distract ourselves because those are hard to tackle. Do I want to tackle poverty, or do I want to get this parking lot paved the way I want? Do I want the stripe red instead of yellow? Like, that's way easier to take on those battles than to the battles I believe the church really should be taking on: injustice and oppression and things like that aren't people. And I don't think they're people. Sometimes people make decisions that cause these things, right? And so it seems like it's not really the people we're attacking at all. It's these unjust systems and these things that we're supposed to be really fighting against, that in this metaphor, Goliath could represent. And so I think that's an important question: is what does Goliath represent? Is it the Baptists, or is it the drug dealers, or is it the people whose lifestyles we don't agree with, or is it systems of racism, systems of sexism, systems, stuff we've been talking about a lot in our culture lately, which I'm really glad we're having conversations. I don't think they're the most fruitful conversations yet, but at least now we're talking about it, and maybe this is how it has to start, and we can continue those, I hope. But I think that's a really good observation that I would never put in the David and Goliath story, right, at Vacation Bible School or Sunday school. Like we talk about family systems, or what we do with our fear, or what we do with our frustration, or who are we taking things out on, or any of those issues. And we should be talking about those things a lot more in church, I think, than some of the things that we choose to talk about. And that starts with us. I mean, it starts right here. We're doing it now, and we're in 3 different churches. We'll take these ideas back and hopefully talk about these things more in our churches. But I think that's just a super good point and subject to talk about. We could do the whole thing just on that, really.
Yeah, we really just about could.
And maybe we should have, but we'll next time we come across something like this, maybe we'll break it down a little bit more, because I think those are really important conversations to have, because that's where the rubber really meets the road. And abuse and emotional abuse, even neglecting people, because of the things that are happening outside. Or in this case, also what this applies to is things that happened in the past. You know, this brother, he's still miffed that David's going to be the king, like certainly, you know, and so that's part of it too. It's like lack of forgiveness, lack of reconciliation. We're carrying around. I mean, this dude's been carrying around anger now since David got anointed as king, and now he's taking it out on him publicly. You know, we have to learn how to have more of that reconciliation and stuff. And so, I mean, this obviously is very deep and complex stuff, but really important, I think. Another thing, and something in this really kind of makes me laugh, which I think is great, because in this story, you said in your version, John, it said the reward for killing Goliath is to be free.
Mm-hmm.
Mine says, let me find it. What verse was that? Mine says, oh yeah,
the end of 25.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, 25. Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He keeps coming to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from the taxes in Israel. And so yours says give them freedom, but basically gives them tax exempt status, which is a great motivation for a kid who's about to go and fight. Like, hey, take away your taxes. It just really makes me laugh. Like that's a funny part of this story. But he gets the daughter. You know, he gets a bunch of money, and he gets, you know, tax exempt status. What else about this? What else about this section? Anything? I feel like we really got to the meat of it. Is there anything else we need to
Since you're talking about funny things, the other thing that made me laugh was the distinction of being an uncircumcised Philistine, right?
Yeah.
Like, why did that need to be included? But it's very specific. And here's the thing: he's not one of us.
Yeah.
He's uncircumcised. He's a Philistine. There's a real issue here. We have to do what we need to do in these moments. But it just makes me laugh that that's a distinction. You could have just called him a Philistine. We would have understood. But to throw uncircumcised in there, it's just interesting for the time and day and context of which we're in.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing, and I think it actually pivots off of where we were talking about, but the end of that section where David really articulates the actual role of the shepherd, which is very striking, right? It's not my job is to like sit on the hill and watch the sheep do what they're doing. It's when the threat comes from the outside, I go and take care of it, and part of it is rescue. I rescue the lamb, um, and so what's interesting is, I mean, later in the story, we're going to see David's faults. He is not perfect, but at this point, in comparison to his brother and the other people in Israel around him, you know, they turn their aggression in and they're fighting within the flock. You know, they're fighting the other people that are part of the community. David's real clear. As the king, as the shepherd, I'm not wasting my time either fighting with the sheep or even just, I mean, really watching that way at all. My task is, where are those challenges? Where's the threat? Where are those forces? And I think this gets back to what you were saying, Todd, you know, those outside systems that are actually eroding families and communities, the witness of the church, whatever that is. David is clear. My job is to go after those things because it is a matter of rescuing those who fall prey to those forces. And so while his brother takes out his aggression on David, David's like, let me tell you guys, I know what my job is. Right. And even with his brother, he just turns away and talks to another guy. It's like, okay, I'm going to go talk to this guy instead. I'm not going to fight you. I'm going to go fight that giant, though. I'm not going to fight you. because this isn't where my fight is. I'm gonna go. I know what the real fight is. I know what the thing. I know the giant I need to dismantle. I'm saving my energy for that. I'm focused on that, and I have a track record of discerning where it's at, and I can get that job done. Um, and so I mean, it's really interesting to me. It's a defense of himself, but it also is a striking distinction between his brother and himself. Why was I selected king? Because I know what my job is, because I know what I'm supposed to focus on. And I'm not going to let you pull me into this other stuff that's not mine or that's a waste of my time. I'm not going to get suckered into that fight. Man, I wish I was better at that. Like personally, as I read that, like I wish, I mean, there are times in family, community, friends, church, just on Facebook this afternoon, I picked the fight I shouldn't have. I get sucked into all these stupid fights, and I wish I had more of that clarity that David shows in here of saying like, it's not mine. I'm gonna ignore what you said. You got no power over me, bro. I was anointed. This is my job. But I'll tell you what, when the bear comes, take care of it. And I rescue the lamb. And that's how I take care of the flock. Um, so I just, as we talked, and as you said, what else is there? I glanced. I'm like, oh, before that next section, yeah, that whole little section from David. I think that's an important.
No, and I think that's so important to acknowledge too, just because of David's faults, right? Because of the things he does later on, he does take the high road. He does understand who he's called to be, and he has something bigger than all of that brings him down. And so it shows the humanity of it, but it shows why he got anointed, why he was the one chosen. Because I'm like you, I would have picked that fight all day. You want to talk about me watching these sheep? Oh, let's go. Right? Killed a bear last week. When was the last time you killed a bear? I would have been wearing the bear, And yet, that's not. You're right. That's not the road David takes. He's like, no, we're going to table that. I'm just going to walk away from that, and I'm going to go over here and do the thing I'm supposed to do, that I know to do, that I know how to do, that I've been raised to do. And that pointing back to the lamb in the shepherd nature of, it's not only about ridding of the threat, right? The bear, the lion, or whatever. It's about saving the lamb. It's about going and finding the one, right? Which you jump all the way to the Gospels, and Jesus points back to that constantly, right? And often takes that road just like David does of, I'm not going to pick that battle. I'm going to go this way. That's super important.
Yeah, and it shows why his brother wasn't chosen, also. And I think that like this is such an important part because it comes first. Like it said, David's mistakes later, which is going to come out in a few weeks. Those mistakes are in light of, it sets it up with this way, with him taking the high road, with him doing the right things, with him, being this. So what that story does later on with Bathsheba is it humanizes him from a place where he seems like, man, unattainable. Like it seems like I can't really relate to David here, like we just talked about, because I do the same thing. Like it's so hard. How do you just let that go, and let your brother bully you or whatever? And this isn't the first time this has happened. Like this isn't just in private. Things are probably worse, and as they often are. And so I think that this sets up the story where it's not like a lot of the other Bible heroes that we talk about where they do bad things and then they're redeemed. It's like David does everything the right way. Like he just does his job. He stays in his lane. He's delivering sandwiches. He sees something, and something that we don't talk about very much, that I think is super important, is that this is going to be David's kingdom. If Israel loses this battle, David has the most to lose. David is actually probably the most appropriate one to fight this battle. David is the one that he knows, hey, I'm about to be the king, and Israel is about to be gone. Like everyone's scared, and everybody's actually running away from this dude. Like somebody has to stand up. Like who's gonna do that? And I think that that's a really important piece of this too, is that like this is David's kingdom. It's gonna be, unless there's not a kingdom left, and then all of a sudden, you know, all of his plans are gonna, you know, be very, very different. He's gonna be a shepherd the rest of his life, or whatever that is. And so I feel like David has the most to lose here in a lot of ways. And I don't know if kids think about it like that. I mean, he's young, you know, but I imagine that has to have some kind of role in this story when we read it in the context of the whole thing. Anything else about this, guys? Should we go on?
Yeah.
Let's go on. I'll go ahead and read 38 through, since it's kind of noisy there, Zach. I'll read 38 through 51. Finish this out. So it ends with Saul saying, "Go and the Lord be with you." Godspeed, David. Go fight. Go fight. Verse 38. Then Saul dressed David in his easy for me to say. Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put on a coat of armor and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. "I cannot go in these," he said to Saul, "because I am not used to them." So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, and put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome. He despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I will give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead, and the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with sling and a stone, and without a sword in his hand, he struck the Philistine down and killed him. David ran and stood over him, and he took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the sheath, and after he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. What do y'all think?
I love David putting on Saul's armor. Goes back to what we said at the beginning of this podcast, the size difference, right? And I always get that picture of, you know, when you're a kid and you go put your dad's suit on, or you put your mom's dress on, whatever, right? And it just engulfs you, right? And yet you walk around and you're like, well, I could do this. And yet that's always just the picture I get of David, of like, he's playing dress up. He put Saul's armor on and he's kind of clunking around out there and everybody thinks he's cute. And yet he just shucks it. He's like, this isn't for me. This doesn't fit right. I'm not used to it. Here's what I am used to: the sling and the stone, right? I'll go do the thing that I know to do. And he goes and he runs, right? He runs to the battle line as Goliath approaches. He doesn't back up. He doesn't hesitate. He just goes. And I think there's so much to that, in the sense of how often do we hesitate as people if we're not fully prepared? We don't have everything we want to have to make us comfortable, to make us feel like we have everything planned out. And the minute that something out of normal comes up to us, we back up a little bit to make sure. David doesn't do that. He just keeps pressing forward and saying, hey, this is what I know. It's protection, it's saving the lamb, it's that nature that he has just to go towards that calling, go towards that danger and take it on head first, rather than saying, well, we got to have a plan B. David always is operating in that plan B mode of, here's what we got, let's go. And just does the thing that he feels he needs to do in those moments. All the while, Goliath is like, dude, you're little, you're cute, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to feed you the animals, and we're going to go on about our day. And he doesn't stop. It's just that constant persistence of, here's who I am, here's what I'm going to do, regardless of the situation around me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, what strikes me is David's his faithfulness and his boldness in, like, I mean, he puts it out there and then he acts on what he said. I mean, there is no like, I'm gonna see how this plays out. I'm gonna decide if I mean, it's just, and so part of the faithfulness side is, and I think what makes a difference for David, and he really tells us what the difference is if we're listening. Um, he is absolutely convinced that God is far bigger than Goliath. And so it doesn't matter what David's got, because he's not depending only on what he's got. He has this vision and this view and this orientation in his belief that he does not have to be in and of himself equal to this task, because there is a greater player, who has called him and anointed him, and if all that is true, then he can act accordingly. And I think, and at that point, again, like, sort of the symbolic value comes in. It doesn't have to be militant or aggressive or even violent in the way we let this story play out. But I do find myself saying all the time to people, well, do you really believe in the Holy Spirit? Because right now we're saying it, but we're not acting like it. Or, you know, do you really believe that the church belongs to Christ? Because we say that, but we don't act like it. Um, do you really, like, are you letting God be God? Or are you just saying that and then you think you've got to deliver all the stuff? I mean, which way is it going to be? And it's not that we have doubts and uncertainty and all those kind of things. And if some of our listeners are really struggling with whether you believe that stuff, I mean, that's all fine. Um, but I think what David invites us into is, um, I mean, really, and it's what Jesus wound up inviting us into. You um, let us talk the talk, and then let us walk the walk. I mean, let our behaviors actually accord with what we say we believe. Um, and let us be more bold in what we say, and then let us do our best to act on that boldness with confidence. And I think, again, like that, this is the antidote to all that earlier conversation about our anxieties and the closing down, accepting other parameters, and the closing down of our creativity and getting stuck in the box, and all that stuff. And David just blows that all up. He knows where the problem lies, and it's not in his colleagues or his brother. It's this outside threat. That's where the challenge really lies, and he's focused on that. He doesn't always act according to his own belief system perfectly. Not a one of us does, but at the core, um, he knows God is big, and on this particular day, he acts on it. Um, and so, I mean, I love that he's like, I got all I need. I mean, he's bigger than you, Goliath, and maybe part of the problem was the people around him got stuck, in that whole, like, I got to deliver the day by myself, and so of course they're all smaller than Goliath. But David opens this door to see a faith that really does believe. You know, I say God is bigger. I believe it. I'm going to act on it. I mean, he's just so bold and like, and you're going down today, and just watch it happen. Um, And I think, there's such conviction, clarity, dependence. Um, he doesn't have to bring all this apparatus with him. There's a simplicity to it, and all that comes from this deep reliance on, um, I believe that God is bigger and I'm going to act like it. Um, so that even if he has any doubts, which he probably does, um, he's like overwhelming his own reservations by saying, "But I believe this, and this is how I would act if I believed it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk big, and I'm going to step out there." Um, and I think that's it's just a wonderful part of that story, and I think that's an accessible invitation for us to see in ourselves, but also to see in other people. Like you know, you're doing the Lord's work, man. Um, he's big enough to get this done. Like just go for it. We can be a little riskier. We can be a little more convinced. Like you were saying, Todd, right? I mean, these systems that are such huge giants. And David's example is for us to say, and why can't we topple that? Like, why can't we slay racism? Why can't we rise above the pettiness? Why can't we be better human beings? Why can't we be more like Christ? Why can't love be that powerful in our lives? Um, let's walk out there and act like that's the case because that's what we say we believe. So, you know, let's 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 act on it. Let's try it out with that kind of uh, fearlessness. Getting back to that whole fear play in here. And I think that's just really powerful and convicting of the human tendency to always kind of hedge our bets. And David doesn't do any of that stuff. He's like, I don't need
And
all that. Somebody else has this. Somebody else has got this. And
yeah, absolutely. And he uses what he uses. I think there's a sense of identity in it too, where he
yeah,
uses
oh yeah,
what's his, what he's comfortable with, the tools he used when he fought lions, because he even made that comparison.
yeah,
Oh, it's just he's just like the lions and the bears that I fought. Like this is no different. What did he use to fight them? He used a sling and rocks. And I think that's a really um, that's a really important thing too, is that we have to, number one, using what you have. Starting with what you have, not always wanting to be somebody else, which is a huge problem in the church. We um, used to go to Chicago or watch it on video and try to be another church, and be more like this church, this big church in Chicago. And we're like, oh, well, but we're a little church in West Texas. That's not really the same. But it makes us feel bad because we're not this big church, and we're us. And so, but we're not good enough. And we're told that and told that and told that in churches. I was talking to Zach about this yesterday. Churches in Wyoming, they're told over and over, you're not worth it. You're not good enough. You're not good enough. And it's not, and it's not maybe explicitly, but it's at least implicitly communicated to them by saying, hey, be more like these guys, or why don't you go and learn how to be a good church, instead of really looking, what do we have and what can we do? And I feel like if people would just go in and do those things in churches, I feel like we could go a long way and do a lot of things. But I love that part where he's just like, okay, this doesn't fit. This isn't me.
yeah.
I'm going to use what I know. I'm going to use what I can use. I'm going to, you do what I can do because I'm really good at it. And there's a lot of value in that. And we shouldn't be told to be someone we're not, or to wear something that's not us, or to, but there's so much pressure in everybody's lives. I mean, we talk about the church, but it's in every business. It's in every, if you want to get a promotion, what do? You act like the person who has the job that you want, or you dress for the job you want, not the job that you have, or like all of those things. Very few times do we hear, hey, you're awesome. Like,
Yeah.
do what you do well, keep that up and keep doing it and do more of it. And don't worry about, let me take some stuff off your plate. Let me take some pressure off of you because you're really good at this thing. So do this thing, So I feel like there's practical implications even in the business world in those ways, if we have employees or.
Yeah.
volunteers or whatever in any way, or in our families, in our kids. Like, hey, you're really good at soccer. You know, I know you don't like the trumpet. Maybe don't play maybe just play soccer. I don't know. I mean, I know you got to expose your kids to lots of different things. So I'm not giving parenting advice here. In fact, I'm the last person in the world you want parenting advice from. But, you know, there's something about making people feel good about what they're good at. Because David has that self-confidence and that self-worth that I think is super important.
And again, I think even, you know, even deeper and stronger than just the self-worth is he there really is there's a really important faith element to it.
Yeah.
He knows that he's worth it because God's got it. And so I think that's the contribution of spirituality, that when we reduce spirituality to self-help, we are gutting our most important contribution, which is this is so much bigger than your capacity. Whether you're at your, at a broken spot or you're healthiest you can get. Friends, there's only this much separation, right? I mean, it, it's not that big a deal. I fear it's your most brokenness, but you know that God has got this. You are mightier than the person who's as healthy as they can be. And there's such an important, I think, and it's not to dismiss all of the important. I mean, I'm a huge believer in medicine and psychology and science, and so we use all those things. But I think there's also this sense in which, yeah, I mean, there is God is involved, and when David is able to understand the magnitude of that, that fuels his fearlessness. It is quite possibly, and again, we're foreshadowing later in the story, we find out David's got a lot of common ground with Saul after all. So, is the difference David, or is the difference David's ability here to really be in tune in and open to and depend on God? And in fact, maybe his problem later is he starts getting a little too full of himself. I'm the king now. I'm the big shot. And then there's less God and more of himself. That's actually when he goes off goes off the rails. Here when it's simple and all he's got is the little stuff. It's interesting. The armor, right? I'm not used to it.
Yeah.
Well, later he gets used to it,
Oh,
and then he
yeah.
makes a mess
Yeah.
out of the people around him.
Yeah.
Because he got used to it.
That's a
When
great.
he's at that place where, like, I'm not used to that stuff. I'm not touching that. I don't need it. Then he's mighty as heck because it's not just him. Man, when he gets used to it,
Yeah.
and that's what I think you're saying, Todd. Like, man, I mean, when we tell the church, we'll just get used to, or whoever it is. I mean, work it till you get used to it.
Yeah, that's not good. Well, and David shows up here. Like David's not even supposed to, it's like on clerk, like he's not even supposed to be here today. And he's the one that takes this on, because he showed up to serve his brothers and serve the soldiers. And when everything goes wrong, it's because he didn't show up. Like it's the time when the kings went to battle, it says, and he stayed home, right? And he didn't show up to the battle. This time, like, he showed up there. So there's something to do with getting used to it and not showing up. Just like Saul didn't show up here like he was supposed to, and then David doesn't show up later. And that's like, not showing up is a much bigger deal in these stories than what I've ever realized before.
Yeah, and the other thing you just said, Todd, is the service piece.
Yeah.
Here he's there. He's going to serve his brothers. He knows what a shepherd does to serve the flock. He's going to extend that out, right? He's not in this for his own fame. I mean, he knows his calling, but you're right. He's there to serve, and later on, he gets into trouble because he decides he's going to serve himself, and selfishness becomes so important. and then everything goes screwball. But yeah, back here, he shows up and he's there to serve. He knows exactly what he's there to do, and everything grows out of that place, which is, yeah, that's huge. And I never thought about sort of that orientation um, for David here. Hmm.
Yeah, because he doesn't come to fight. In fact, he might not even know what's going on. I don't know if he was checking his Twitter, but like it's pretty clear that he came to serve. You know, which really sticks out to me, especially the more we talk about it.
Hmm.
And then Jesus, there's that that correlation with Jesus coming to serve. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
not to be served.
yeah.
That's good. Do you guys have any final thoughts on this? There's a lot here. I mean, we really should have split this up.
Probably. Sorry.
This could have been like 4 different podcasts. That was great. No, I think it's that outside of David being anointed, this is the stepping stone into David being king, right? That's the anointing is the physical part, right? The laying on of hands, the pouring on of oil. But this, David and Goliath, is that when you ask people, well, tell me about David. Oh man, he killed that big guy, right? This is where we go. We don't go to the anointing part. We go to the action, right? And then we go to the other stuff that he did not so great. And then we take it back around to the things he did great late in life. But this is it. It's David and Goliath. This is the story people tell. It's what we do in Vacation Bible School and BBS, and whether we get into the nitty gritty and the gory parts of it of not only did he hit him with a rock, he goes and cuts his head off, right? And the Philistines run in fear. They're like, holy crap, we messed with the wrong guy, right? But this is the stepping stone into that kingship, into that calling, into that anointing that David has in a very physically powerful way. This story precedes David and the rest of his kingship. You remember when he killed our big guy? Yeah, let's not mess with that dude, right? And it comes back to him and his relationship with Saul. There's this underlying, I went out there and fought the big guy. You stayed home. It's like Todd said, there's so much in the Hebrew Bible of people just not showing up, and people who do show up, they're the ones that get us moving forward. That's so big and so important here. Simply just showing up and seeing what happens is really an essential part of faith. This underlying, like, let's just be there, let's be present and see what happens, I think is so important in this story here for David.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's, I mean, just a lot of the conversation we had already and just the echoes of that, is just remembering who we are, what the source of strength is, trying not to get mired in, conflict with the wrong quarters, um, working to, there's some self-awareness there, that I don't know if David exercised, but as we read the story, we certainly can. Like, am I doing crazy things because I'm running scared right now? Am I, taking out stuff on the wrong people? Am I, am I trying to go through somebody else's motions? Am I, trying to do something I'm not used to? Am I trying to overcomplicate this? Am I trying to, acquire stuff that I don't even need, because I bought into some idea that somehow that's going to make a difference? Can I be a little more bold, a little more simple? Yeah, I mean, those kind of things we talked about today, I think, what I'm going to hold on to.
Right now, what resonates with me is the showing up thing. That really, the difference between showing up for people and just mailing it in, the difference between showing up and being present in people's lives rather than just being popular, really doing things that matter, and continuing to show up to the places where there's people that are hurting, and I think that that's just something that I need to that's what I've been called to do, and that's what I've been doing. And there's I feel a lot of guilt sometimes for doing things a different way than what, I mean, you can only be told you're wrong so many times before you start thinking, oh, am I? And I wish I had David's resolve. And maybe that's another thing. Somebody on Facebook shared a story about when I was a kid today. And part of me was like, man, like I was kind of a jerk. But part of me is like, man, I wish I had more. I wish I still had some of that. A little more, and I've been wanting to get back to that, and the idea of polarization being looked at as such a negative thing, but I feel like Jesus was polarizing, and I feel like I'm thinking about a lot of these things. Like, you have to be polarizing in the right ways, just like we talked about the church should be aggressive, but not toward people, but towards some of these issues. And so I think reframing some of these things and allowing myself to be aggressive for the right reasons, and allowing myself to be a jerk for the right reason. I'm reading this book. I don't have it handy, but it's called the dark side of the light chasers. And it's about that. It's about embracing the things that we don't like about ourselves, or even bad things that we've done, embracing where that comes from, because that's a part of us that can be helpful and can fuel the good things that we do. But it has to be done in the right doses and for the right reasons. So like Jesus got angry, right? We know we all, whenever somebody wants to excuse their anger, it's Jesus flipped the tables over. And like we know, and Jesus got frustrated with the disciples, and Jesus got, and all of these things, but he used those emotions in a positive way to do positive things, instead of, imploding on itself, like what David and his brother are doing here, and all of these things. So I feel like, I mean, that's kind of a lot for a final thought, but I'm feeling that call to embrace that inner child more, and those things that I have tried to escape about myself. I'm just trying to embrace those things in a way that pushes me forward, and not a way that is destructive. Because when you put too much salt in something, you just taste the salt, And so you have to use the right amount of these things, but they're all valuable. Everything about us is good. Everything about us is valuable. We make mistakes. We do bad things because we get the formula wrong, I think. But as we grow, I feel like we learn how to get that right. And so that's my big takeaway from this, is showing up in the right way for the right reasons. All right. Well, this was really good, you guys. It's a little long, but we can cut it down a little maybe, or we'll just have a long one. That's okay. I will appreciate you guys being here. Do either of you have anything else to say before you guys good? All right. Well, I appreciate everyone for listening. I appreciate you guys. Y'all are awesome. And I think it's awesome that Zach is at the brewery, because that's where we usually have church. And so I'm missing that right now. But it looks like we're going to be able to starting some of that stuff up pretty soon. Hopefully at least by the summer. So that's exciting too. So we're recording this on St. Patrick's Day. So happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone, even though you're going to hear this late. We got it in on time. Thank you guys so much.
I just can't wait to get on the road again. The life I love is making music with my friends, and I can't wait to get on the road again. On the road again. Going places that I've never been, seeing things that I may never see again. I can't wait to get on the road again. On the road again. Like a band of gypsies, we go down the highway. We're the best of friends, insisting that the world keep turning our way. And our way is on the road again. I just can't wait to get on the road again. The life I love is making music with my friends, and I can't wait to get on the road again.